The skin of the earth lies split and broken, deep cracks stretching like ancient scars across the ground. The worn spine of a faded diary half buried in dust. A trembling hand reaches down and opens it. Ink bleeds softly into the paper as a woman writes with deliberate, fragile strokes. If this page becomes my last, let it tell the truth. We waited for the sky, and the sky forgot us. In the silence that follows, sharp images cut in like flashes of memory, an empty well echoing into darkness, thin goats stumbling across barren fields, dust storms swallowing the horizon, a little girl coughing, clutching at her mother's shawl as grit fills the air. Beside the diary, a single candle shivers in the dry wind, its small flame fighting for its life. It bends, falters, but somehow refuses to die out. Over this, a soft voice begins to speak. Alem capes these diary entries to count the days without rain, trying to understand a sky that no longer follows the patterns her ancestors trusted. Each line she writes is part record, part prayer, part warning for whoever comes after. Yet it had not always been like this. Before the silence of the sky, Alem's world overflowed with color. In her early 30s, she was known across the village as a skilled farmer, strong, patient, quick to laugh. Her 6-year-old daughter Saba followed at her heels like a cheerful shadow, her tiny sandals slapping joyfully against the earth as she chased butterflies between thick rows of green maize. In those days, scenes of warmth filled every corner of village life. During harvest festivals, villagers danced to drum beats beneath strings of bright fabric. Smoke curled lazily from shared cooking fires where neighbors swapped jokes and recipes. Under the big baobab tree, elders sat in a wide circle retelling stories of the generous rains that once came with the steady rhythm of a heartbeat, never early, never late. Not far away, the river wound through the valley like a ribbon of gold, wide and shimmering in the sun. Children splashed in the shallows, flinging water at one another and squealing with delight. Women washed clothes along the banks, slapping wet fabric against smooth stones as they traded gossip. Men waded in with practiced ease, casting fishing nets that spread like wings over the water. In one lingering shot, the river's surface becomes a mirror, perfectly reflecting the villagers' faces as they laugh and work. Their expressions blend with the sky and trees so seamlessly that land, water, and people seem like a single living body, beating as one. Everything in the village moves to nature's rhythm. Alem often stopped at the riverbank, gazing at that golden ribbon as it curled through the valley. As long as it flowed, she believed, so would her people's future. The river, to her, was a promise. Then, one season, something small but important changed. It began with clouds. At first, they came as they had always come, thick and heavy, pulling a cool shadow over the valley. Thunder rolled in the distance like a giant turning in his sleep. The villagers tilted their faces upward, waiting for the familiar scent of wet soil, the first cool drops on sunburned skin. But this time, the sky hesitated. The wind rose, pushing the dark clouds across the valley. Still, no rain fell. Children stood with empty buckets, blinking at the blank air. Elders squinted uneasy, their stories of the faithful rain suddenly feeling more like memories than promises. Even so, the farmers planted. Habit, hope, and history guided their hands. Alem pressed seeds into the soil, reassuring herself that the rains were simply late, not gone. Yet within weeks, the young green shoots began to curl, their leaves browned at the edges, then turned brittle, crumbling when she touched them. That evening, Alem opened her diary with a tightening in her chest and wrote, "The clouds came with thunder but left with nothing. The soil drinks nothing." Days became weeks. At the village well, the rope creaked louder each morning as it scraped around the wooden beam, lowering buckets deeper and deeper into the narrowing throat of water. Children peered over the edge, counting how far the bucket had to fall before touching the shrinking surface. To Alem, every extra second of rope slipping through rough hands felt like watching a countdown she could not stop. One night, as she tried to record the 4th week without rain, her pen scratched weakly across the page. The ink grew pale, fading into the yellow paper. She shook it, pressed harder, dragged the nib again and again, but the words turned pale and ghostly. Alem stared at her failing pen and understood the cruel parallel instantly. Her diary was drying up, just like their land. As months slipped into a 2nd year, the land became unrecognizable, like a trusted neighbor who once greeted you warmly, but now closed the door in your face. Dust storms began to sweep through the village without warning, hurling sand that stung bare skin and seeped into every crack of every hut. The few crops that did sprout never grew tall enough to cast a shadow. Because the well sank lower and lower, families were forced to walk farther in search of water. The nearest stream, once lively with reeds and birds, shrank into a chain of muddy puddles. Day after day, Alem joined the long, silent trek, balancing clay pots on her hips, while Saba trudged beside her, her tiny lungs protesting every breath of dust-laden air. With the land under stress, the community's unity began to fray. During evening gatherings under the baobab, voices rose in argument. Some villagers insisted it was time to leave, migrate to the city, find wage work, follow any path that led away from the dying fields. Others clung stubbornly to tradition. The rains have always returned, they said. This is just a test. The disagreements grew heated, and for the first time, Alem saw neighbors sit apart, their backs turned slightly away from one another. Food became scarce. Pots that were once full of steaming stew and thick porridge now held thin soups, and some nights, nothing at all. Quietly, Alem began skipping her meals, claiming she had eaten earlier. Saba believed her at first, but hunger has a way of sharpening a child's perception. On nights when Alem's cheeks looked especially hollow, Saba would slide part of her own food toward her mother without a word. They shared their silence, the way they once shared laughter. One afternoon, Alem sat beneath the tree near their home, a tree that had once thrown a generous circle of shade. Its branches were bare now, rattling softly as the dry wind tugged at them. As she pressed her pen to the diary's page, the tree loosened its final leaf. It spiraled slowly down beside the open book, like a quiet warning, even the strongest things can wither. Then the breaking point came, and it arrived as suddenly as a snapped rope. On a blistering afternoon, several villagers clustered around the old well, lowering their buckets as they always did. The air shimmered with heat. Someone tugged the rope, expecting the familiar splash of water. Instead, the earth groaned. A hollow, cracking sound echoed from deep below. The stone walls trembled. In an instant, rocks collapsed inward with a thunderous roar, sending up a choking plume of dust. The villagers stumbled back, shielding their eyes. When the dust settled, the well was gone, its mouth filled with jagged debris and darkness. The one source they had always trusted had failed. As people shouted and scrambled in confusion, a small boy staggered, then crumpled onto the cracked ground. His mother screamed, dropping to her knees to lift his limp body. Neighbors rushed from all sides with the last drops of water from their containers, tipping them desperately into his mouth, onto his forehead. Alem watched, frozen, her own throat burning with thirst and fear. That night, an immense quiet pressed over the village. Men, women, and children gathered in a tight circle, faces drawn and hollow, eyes reflecting the trembling light of a single candle at the center. No one spoke now. Words felt useless. The candle flickered as the wind poked through the gaps in their shelter. For a moment, the flames steadied, and then, with a final weak shiver, it vanished. Darkness swallowed the room. In that instant, it felt as if hope had died with the flame. By early morning, despair lay over the village like a layer of dust, thin but everywhere. People moved slowly as if they were walking through water that no longer existed. Yet just as the sun climbed higher, the growl of a motorbike broke the silence. A stranger rode into the village, his face lined from travel, but his eyes bright and searching. He greeted the elders with both hands, listened carefully as they described the failed rains, the collapsed well, the dying fields. He was a local NGO officer, trained in climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction, but he spoke with the plain words of someone who understood the land. When he finally responded, his ideas sounded almost unbelievable. Rooftop rainwater harvesting systems that could catch even a short drizzle, sand dams built across the dry riverbed to capture and store runoff underground, solar-powered pumps to lift water when rivers ran low, underground cisterns to protect precious supplies from heat and evaporation. The villagers exchanged uncertain looks. After so many broken seasons, solutions sounded almost like insults. The oldest elder stepped forward, his voice rough from dryness. "How can we harvest what we don't have?" he asked. "The rains have abandoned us." In reply, the officer knelt in the dust. With one finger, he drew a small circle on the ground. "You still get some rain," he said quietly. "Not as much as before, not when you need it, but it comes. Right now, it falls, rushes away, and disappears. You're not cursed by the sky, you're just losing what little it gives you because you're not catching it." Alem stood at the edge of the crowd, fatigue pressing on her shoulders. Yet something in his words tugged at her attention. Her eyes were drawn to the simple circle he traced, a shape small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, yet big enough to hold an idea she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time: possibility. Therefore, when the officer suggested a plan, Alem stepped forward with the others. In the days that followed, movement returned to the village, tentative at first, then growing more determined. The officer did not bring miracles, he brought tools, training, and respect. At dawn, the villagers gathered to divide tasks. Men hauled stones from the hills and stacked them across the dry riverbed, building low check dams designed to slow and trap water when it finally came. Women climbed onto rooftops, fastening tin and bamboo gutters, turning their homes into thirsty mouths waiting for the sky. Meanwhile, the youth attacked the hardened earth with shovels, digging narrow trenches and channels to guide future rain into underground cisterns they were helping to build. In the fields, a few villagers raised small solar panels on wooden frames, tilting them carefully toward the relentless sun. The same sun that had burned their crops would now help pump and move the water they managed to save. One afternoon, Alem knelt beside Saba in the cool corner of their hut. Between them sat a small clay pot half filled with water. Carefully, Alem placed a lid over it and sealed the edges with a strip of cloth soaked in wax. "We save a little each day," she whispered, "for the unexpected, for sickness, for long walks, for days when the sky is silent." It was a simple act of water rationing, a small lesson in disaster preparedness, hidden inside a mother's gentle voice. That evening, Alem entered her hut and saw, beside her diary, the candle that had once died. This time, when she struck the match, the flame leapt up strong and sure. Outside, the village was learning not just to wait for rain, but to prepare for its absence. The miracle, when it finally arrived, came quietly. One afternoon, Alem was grinding grain outside her doorway, lost in the familiar rhythm of stone on stone. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic ping interrupted the sound, like a pebble flicked against a pot. She paused. There was another ping, and another, fainter but steady. Slowly, Alem raised her head. Tiny droplets of water struck the new metal gutters along her roof, dancing toward the downspout. At the same moment, scattered droplets began to stipple the dusty ground, dotting it with dark little moons. The first raindrops in months. For a breathless second, no one moved. Then shouts exploded across the village. People rushed from their huts, eyes wide with disbelief and joy, watching the thin lines of water slide through gutters and splash into waiting tanks. Children laughed as the first rivulets trickled along the trenches they had helped dig, guiding the water toward buried cisterns and the base of thirsty trees. Up on the dry riverbed, the check dams held firm as brown runoff tumbled against them. Instead of vanishing downstream, much of the precious water slowed, pooled, and seeped into the sand, stored away like coins in a hidden bank. Nearby, a small solar pump hummed to life, beginning its slow work of lifting groundwater into newly laid irrigation channels. Alem lifted her hand into the air. A single cool drop landed in her palm, then another and another. They glittered like tiny beads of glass on her calloused skin. Her breath hitched. Tears blurred her vision as raindrops mingled with the salt on her cheeks. Not far away, the dead tree that had haunted her for so long stood as it always had, still, skeletal, unmoving. A tiny green bud begins to push out from one of its branches, almost shyly. It is not dramatic, it does not transform the tree in an instant, but it is there, a quiet sign that the land, like its people, is ready to try again. In the weeks that follow, the whispers of change grow louder. Morning by morning, small shoots of green puncture the once barren fields. Villagers no longer plant blindly and hope. Instead, they plan. Guided by the NGO officer, they create a simple rain calendar painted on the wall near the baobab tree, marking not just the months of expected rain, but also backup planting dates and dry season strategies. Children help color it, turning risk reduction into a shared story rather than a secret fear. Near the huts, new tanks stand like silent guards, glistening in the sun. Pipes snake from them towards small vegetable gardens, where drip lines release water slowly, drop by careful drop. A newly formed village water committee meets under the tree each week, deciding how to share, store, and protect what they now understand is their most fragile wealth. At the same time, granaries rise higher, better sealed against pests and storms. Women experiment with hardier seed varieties and staggered planting so that one failed crop no longer means an empty year. Simple tools, a rain gauge, a painted level mark on the cistern wall, a radio for weather updates, become part of their daily rhythm, weaving disaster preparedness into ordinary life. Months pass. Where dust once ruled, green now pushes forward. Rows of sorghum, maize, and vegetables sway in the gentle breeze, their leaves trembling in the mornings as if shivering with delight. The solar-powered irrigation lines thread through the fields like new veins, pulsing with life. Cisterns, half-buried and cool, hold a quiet reserve for the next dry stretch. The market, which had nearly disappeared, reawakens. Women arrange baskets of bright tomatoes, leafy greens, and neatly bundled herbs. Traders weigh sacks of grain with hands that no longer shake from hunger. Laughter returns, not as loud as before, perhaps, but deeper, earned. Down by the river, the golden ribbon gleams again. It is not as wide as Alem remembers from her childhood, that its flow is steady now instead of frantic and wasteful. Children splash along the edges, their games watched carefully by parents who understand the river's power and fragility at once. At her doorway, Alem sits with her diary open on her lap. Her fingers are stained with fresh ink. The pen moves easily again. Saba, taller now, sits beside her, tracing the lines of old entries with quiet curiosity. On a clean page, Alem writes her final words to the future. We learned the sky owes us nothing. We must prepare for its silences. When the rain comes, we catch it. When it leaves, we share what remains. We will not wait helplessly again. She closes the diary gently and looks out over the fields, the tanks, the river, and the budding tree.